Confession of a woman who accidentally became the key witness in a human trafficking case. Athens, Dubai, Berlin. 2016 to 2023, people don't notice cleaners. This isn't cruelty or arrogance, it's simply the way things are arranged. When you walk into an office with a cart and a mop, you cease to exist for the people who work there. You're part of the interior. Part of the building. You come, you do your job, you leave, and no one remembers your face, no one thinks about what you might have seen or heard. It's an enormous invisibility, and most people in my profession experience it as humiliation. I experienced it that way too, for 7 years. Until one day that invisibility saved my life. And destroyed the lives of many others. Those who were used to not being noticed. My name is Adriana. I am 44 years old. I'm Romanian, from a small town in Transylvania, the kind of place people aren't supposed to leave but everyone does, because there's no work, no money, no prospects, and sooner or later you stand before a choice: stay and slowly suffocate, or leave and try something different. I left at 28. My husband had gone 3 years earlier, leaving me with 2 children, Bogdan, who was 6 at the time, and Elena, who was 4. I worked at everything available: cashier, seamstress, 1 season on strawberry fields in Spain. Then someone I knew said there was work in Athens with a cleaning company. Decent pay, you could rent a room. I went. Athens received me the way big cities receive people without money and without connections, indifferently. Not cruelly, not warmly. Just, here's the city, here's the work, here are the rules, figure out the rest yourself. I worked for a cleaning company for 6 years. I cleaned offices, shopping centers, once a hospital. That was the hardest. I brought the children over after a year, once I'd found my footing, found an apartment, small and expensive by my standards, in the Petrolona neighborhood, and they started Greek school and learned the language in a year the way children learn languages, simply absorbing it, effortlessly. As if it were natural. I learned Greek less well, but enough, for work, for the shop, for talking to teachers. Life was not rich, but it was stable. That's an important word, stable. When you've lived in instability for a long time, stability becomes the primary value. Not luxury, not happiness, just that tomorrow would resemble today and you'd know what to expect. In March 2016 our company got a new contract, cleaning in a business center in the Kafizia neighborhood. That's a wealthy northern district of Athens where financial companies, law firms, and foreign corporate offices are based. A good contract, large building, several floors, regular work. I was assigned to the 4th and 5th floors. The 4th floor housed a company with a beautiful English name, something about consulting and investments. The 5th, another one, smaller, with a Greek name I could never remember. I cleaned there 3 times a week, in the evening, after the staff had gone home. Standard arrangement. I arrived at 7, left at 10. Vacuum, mop, rubbish bins, toilets. Monotonous, quiet, predictable. The first 2 months, nothing unusual. An ordinary office, desks, computers, a coffee machine, meeting rooms. Sometimes someone stayed late, they'd nod to me without looking up from their screen, I'd work around their desk and move on. Sometimes the meeting room had unwashed glasses after a session, I'd clear them. In May something changed, not sharply, gradually. I didn't formulate it right away, I simply began to notice things. First, twice a week unfamiliar people appeared on the 5th floor, not staff, but what seemed like visitors. Men, usually 3 or 4 of them, sometimes more. Well dressed. They came after official working hours had ended, roughly when I was starting to clean, and left after about an hour and a half. They didn't notice me. As I said, people don't notice cleaners. Second, something unusual began appearing in the rubbish bins. Not dramatic, just details that didn't add up to a coherent picture. Once, fragments of printouts in Arabic. I don't read Arabic. But I recognize the script. Then, the following week, several sheets with tables that someone had torn lengthways and crossways, but not carefully enough that they couldn't be reassembled. Numbers, unfamiliar names, dates. I wasn't collecting rubbish deliberately. I was simply emptying bins into a bag and taking it to the container. But at some point, I can't explain why, it just happened, I once didn't throw away one such torn sheet. I folded it into quarters and put it in my apron pocket. At home I spread it on the table, assembled the pieces. Looked at it, it was a table. Names, female, judging by the names, from various countries. Ages. Some kind of codes. Numbers beside each name. I looked at it for a long time. Then put it in the desk drawer. Went to bed. Didn't sleep for several hours. The following week I paid attention to a conversation. It happened by accident. I was cleaning the corridor outside the meeting room on the 5th floor. The door was not quite shut, the voices were loud enough. They were speaking Greek, quickly. I understood roughly half. But that half I remembered, they were talking about women. About how many? About where to? About there being no problem with documents, there was a man at the consulate. About the next batch being in 3 weeks, batch, that word I understood precisely. Batch, that's when people are spoken of as goods. I stopped cleaning. I stood in the corridor with a mop and bucket and listened. Then the conversation fell quiet. I heard movement, chairs pushing back from the table. I walked quickly forward along the corridor, toward the toilets, as if simply following my route. The meeting room door opened behind me. A man came out, one of those I'd already seen several times at these evening gatherings. He walked past me. Looked at me, through me, the way you look at a wall, and went to the lift. I continued cleaning. Until the end of my shift. Did everything as usual. Gathered my cart, said goodnight to the security guard downstairs. He always said Kalinada and I said the same. Everything normal, everything as usual. At home Bogdan was doing homework. Elena was already asleep. I made dinner, watched Bogdan eat, talked with him for a while. He was telling me something about school, about a friend who'd moved away. I listened and answered and thought about something else, then Bogdan went to bed. I took that torn sheet from the desk drawer. Put it in front of me. Looked at the list of names and numbers. If what I had heard was what it seemed, this was human trafficking. Living people. Women whose names were in this list. Who were being taken somewhere. In a batch. I was a cleaner in an office where this was being planned, and I didn't know what to do with that. The first thing I thought of was the police. The Greek police. Call, report it. That seemed like the obvious solution, simple and right, but I was a Romanian migrant with a residence permit, working for a cleaning company, and I had nothing except one torn sheet of paper and something I had accidentally overheard through a half-open door. I didn't know the names of those people in the meeting room, or the company's full details, or what exactly the codes in that table meant. I knew nothing concrete, only intuition and fear. The Greek police might listen to me. Or might not. They might enter me in a database as a potential witness, and then those people with a contact at the consulate would know of my existence before I'd managed to do anything useful. I decided to wait. To gather more. That decision didn't come easily. Because while I was gathering more, those women from the list, they were somewhere. They perhaps didn't yet know their names were in someone's table. Perhaps they'd been told they were going to a good job, waitress, housekeeper, nanny. Perhaps they already knew the truth and were screaming, but no one could hear them. That knowledge weighed on me. It weighed every night and every morning. It weighed while I cleaned that office, 3 times a week, still invisible, still part of the interior, but I continued. Over the next 8 weeks I worked differently. Not slower or faster, the same. Only now I memorized things. I memorized the faces of those who came to the evening meetings. I memorized fragments of conversations. My Greek improved from necessity, from intense listening. I memorized documents that ended up in the rubbish, not all of them, not every one, but those that seemed important. I photographed them with my phone, quickly, right inside the bin, one shot, put the phone away, continued working. I used a new phone. Cheap, bought for cash. I left my old one at home, in case anyone thought to check. After 2 months I had enough to understand the general picture, The company on the fifth floor was an intermediary. It was engaged in what is professionally called recruitment, only it recruited not employees for offices, but women from poor countries to be sent to wealthy ones. Moldova, Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, countries from which people come in search of a better life. They were promised work, legitimate, with a decent salary, with proper documents. Those who agreed entered a scheme from which it was very hard to escape. The final destination, judging by documents and fragments of conversation, was the Emirates, Dubai, several other cities. Money went there too, through a chain of accounts, part of which I'd seen in those tables. The scale was significant. Not dozens of people, hundreds, judging by the volume of documentation I'd managed to see over 2 months. The man who ran the meetings on the fifth floor I knew by sight by then, not by name, just by sight. About 50, Greek, with the manner of someone accustomed to being listened to. Not aggressive, not rude, precisely that kind of person is often the most dangerous, because you don't immediately take them seriously. I needed a way out. Not from the situation, out of the country. Or more precisely, not quite out. I needed a person or a structure outside the Greek system, to whom I could hand what I had. I remembered an organization I had heard of a long time ago, back in Romania, from an acquaintance who worked with migrant rights. The International Organization for Migration. IOM, a UN body that works with victims of trafficking among other things. Not police, not a prosecutor's office, an international humanitarian organization. It had offices in Athens. I found the address online. Went there on a Saturday, my day off. Told the receptionist I wanted to speak with someone about an important matter. I was seen by a middle-aged man who introduced himself, Georgios, protection coordinator. He spoke Romanian. It turned out he'd worked in Bucharest for several years and hadn't forgotten the language. I told him. Not everything at once, cautiously, in stages, watching his reaction. He listened carefully. Didn't interrupt. When I showed him several photographs from my phone, printouts, tables, partially reconstructed documents, he looked at the screen for a long time. Then he said, "Adriana, what you are describing is serious. Very serious. I want to tell you several things, and I ask you to take them seriously. First, what I had was not enough to open a case immediately. Full documentation was needed, names were needed, confirmed routes were needed. Second, if I continued gathering information and was discovered, the risk to me and to my children would become very high. Third, they had partners, structures that dealt specifically with such investigations and could act across borders. Europol, specialized German agencies, several NGOs with good reputations in this field. Are you willing to work with them?" he asked. I thought of the women in that list. Of what the word batch meant when applied to people. Yes, I said. What followed that conversation took another 4 months. 4 months during which I continued arriving at that office 3 times a week and cleaning. 3 times a week I saw those people in the meeting room, heard fragments of conversations, took out the rubbish, and every important fragment I photographed and passed on through Georgios to the German structure they worked with. The German side was a specialized division of the Federal Criminal Police Office, the BKA, dealing with cross-border human trafficking. Contact with them went through Georgios and through a woman called Birgit. German, around 40, cold precision in every word. She spoke English. We communicated through Georgios as interpreter, sometimes directly, because my English was at least something. Birgit never said anything unnecessary. She asked questions and received answers. Sometimes she sent clarifications, through a secure channel that Georgios had set up on my phone. Specific things: I need the name of the person who appeared at Tuesday's meeting. I need the exact date of the next dispatch if you hear it. I need the account number from the April table. I delivered. Not always, sometimes there was simply no opportunity, sometimes the document I needed wasn't there. But often, I delivered. Bogdan and Elena knew nothing during this time. Bogdan was 16, old enough to notice changes in his mother, and he did notice. Once he asked, "Mum, are you all right?" I said, "Yes, just tired." He looked at me with that particular teenage perceptiveness that surprises you in children. They see more than they're supposed to. But he didn't press, The most frightening moment in those 4 months was one specific evening. I was cleaning the meeting room on the 5th floor after an evening session. The meeting had ended, everyone had left. I went in, started collecting glasses. A folder had been left on the table. Open. I cleaned around it, not looking at it. Then I accidentally picked it up to move it and wipe the table underneath. Inside the folder was a list. Unlike the previous ones, this was different. These weren't just names and numbers. These were photographs. Small, black and white, printed on ordinary paper. Women, young, most of them appearing to be between 20 and 25. Under each photograph, a name, a country, an age. I stood with that folder in my hands. Looking at the photographs, these were living people. Real faces. Not abstract, trafficking victims from the news, specific women, each of whom had a life somewhere in Moldova or Ukraine or Bulgaria. Who were perhaps at home right now thinking they'd soon be leaving for a good job. My hands trembled. I photographed every page, quickly. While no one was there, though I was certain no one was. Then I put the folder back. Exactly as it had been lying, I left the meeting room. Continued cleaning. Toilets. Corridor. Took out the rubbish, the security guard said Kalinada. I answered. Everything normal. On the street I went around the corner and stood there for about 5 minutes. Then walked to the bus stop. That night I didn't sleep at all. I could hear Elena's breathing through the wall. She slept in the small room and her breathing was even and safe. I lay there thinking about those photographs. About the fact that each of those women also had someone who could hear her breathing at night, a mother, a sister, a child. Someone who didn't know. In the morning I sent Georgios one message, something important. Urgent. The photographs from the folder became the piece that changed everything. Birgit, having received them, wrote 2 days later, Adriana, we have identified several women from this list. 2 have already been found. They were detained at Dubai Airport Customs 2 weeks ago as undocumented workers. This confirms the route and the timeline. We are ready to move. Moving meant the official phase of the investigation. A European warrant. Greek authorities, who couldn't be bypassed on Greek territory, but who could be brought in through European structures in a way that minimized the risk of leaks. 3 weeks after that evening in the meeting room, the arrests took place. By that point I was no longer working in that building. Georgios had arranged my transfer to another location under the pretext of staff rotation, standard practice in cleaning companies. No one paid attention. Cleaners don't stay in one place, that's also part of the invisibility. 8 people were arrested. The Greek man I knew by sight. Several of his partners, 2 turned out to be citizens of other countries, 1 had diplomatic cover, which caused a separate diplomatic incident. Accounts were frozen. Documentation was seized. Those women from the folder, most were warned in time. Not all. Several weren't found in time. That is an unclosed page that I try not to think about too often, because when I do it is very heavy. Some stories had good endings. Others remain unknown. My official testimony was given in Berlin. I went there with Bogdan and Elena. All 3 of us were given temporary status for the period of the investigation. Berlin in winter, gray, cold, with a short bright day and a long dark evening. Nothing like Athens. The children looked at it with curiosity, everything new, everything different. Bogdan said once, Mum, does it snow here? I said, it does. He said, I want to see it. He saw it. In February snow fell, and he and Elena went out into the courtyard and stood there with their faces turned up to the snowflakes, like children who haven't seen snow for several years. Because in Athens it's rare. I watched them from the window and thought about what a strange road had brought us to this Berlin courtyard with its snow, a road from a small town in Transylvania through strawberry fields in Spain and a cleaning company in Athens and a torn sheet of paper in a rubbish bin, to testimony in Berlin and snow outside the window. Life isn't planned that way. It simply happens. The trial concluded in 2021. Several convictions. A Greek court, European coordination. Details are partly in the public record, anyone who wants to find them can, using the right search terms. We stayed in Germany. The children received long-term residency rights. Bogdan is studying now, he wants to be an engineer. He always loved exact sciences. Elena is in secondary school, speaking German better than me after just 2 years, the way she does. I work, not as a cleaner, though there would be nothing wrong with that. I work at the same organization as Georgios, only in the Berlin office. I help people who find themselves in similar situations, not as an investigator or a lawyer, simply as someone who understands their language. The Romanian language, the language of a migrant's fear, the language of a person without documents in a foreign country. Georgios calls sometimes. Birgit sent me a congratulation when the case closed, one sentence, but from her that was a great deal. I think sometimes about what would have happened if I hadn't picked up that torn sheet. If I'd simply tipped it into the bag along with everything else and carried it to the container. If I hadn't assembled the pieces on the kitchen table that night, those women from the folder. Those who were warned in time. They are somewhere now, living their lives, and they don't know that a woman with a mop and a cart, whom no one noticed, pulled their names out of a rubbish bin. That is the purest form of invisibility I know. When you do something important, and still no one sees you. Only now it isn't humiliation. It's simply how it turned out. Bogdan asked me yesterday what exactly I'd been doing in Athens. Not the cleaning work, what specifically, what had brought us to Berlin. He's 19, he's grown up. I told him. Not everything, not in detail, but the substance of it. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Mom, weren't you afraid?" I thought about how to answer honestly. "Very afraid," I said. Every day. Every time I walked into that office, he asked, "Then why didn't you stop?" I thought again. For a long time, because there were photographs in that folder, I said at last. Each one had a face. When you see a face, you can no longer simply stop. Bogdan nodded. Said nothing more. Got up, kissed me on the temple and went to his room. Outside was a Berlin evening. Quiet, gray, with streetlights along the canal. Nothing like Athens. Nothing like Transylvania, my city now, not because I chose it, because that's how it turned out, because there were faces in the folder, and walking away was no longer possible. Names have been changed. Details have been deliberately altered to protect the narrator and her family. Human trafficking through intermediary structures in EU countries with routes through the Middle East is documented in annual reports by Europol, IOM and ANOC. Greece is identified as one of the key transit states in European trafficking schemes according to official EU reports for 2015 to 2022. The role of accidental witnesses unconnected to law enforcement in exposing such schemes has been documented multiple times in investigation materials. Cleaners clean the offices of millions of people every day. They are not noticed. Sometimes that is their only protection. Sometimes it is the only reason certain stories become known at all. If you work in cleaning, in service, in any of those professions that make you invisible, you see more than those you serve imagine. Sometimes that knowledge is worth a great deal, sometimes that knowledge changes lives.